Hello, YouTubers. This is Gold Standard 924 coming at you with a Wrestling Reimagining series for you guys today. So, we're going to pick up where we left off in our fantasy booking from WCW 1998. So, we are going to transition over from Spring Stampede over to our May PPV Slamboree. And basically, if you watched my previous installment, Sting successfully defended the belt against the Macho Man Randy Savage. And prior to that, Bret Hart successfully defeats Kevin Nash in a number one contenders match for a world title shot at Slamboree. So the main event set in stone. So Sting and Bret Hart will be your main event. Before we get into more detail regarding the build up to that World Heavyweight Championship bout, we're just going to kind of run down the undercard matches and basically take it from there. So, without further ado, we're just going to kick things off. Uh, so, Slamboree will open up with a TV title defense between the champion Chris Benoit taking on Finlay. And basically, the match that they actually had at the in real life when they had it on the actual Slamboree 98 card, this was actually the opening bout. So I would keep it the same as what we saw. Only thing I would have changed was perhaps the finish. With Chris Benoit going over Finlay. So this should be a really good, strong style match. And normally WCW excels very well when it comes to opening matches. And I figured this would be a pretty good way to kind of open up the pay per view with a pretty technically sound match. So and Benoit and Finlay really click well together. So I can't really imagine them having a bad match. So Benoit to retain the TV title. Second match we have is Scott Steiner taking on Jim the Anvil Neidhart. This basically is a continuation of Scott Steiner's reign of terror as far as him being big Papa Pump, singles competitor is concerned. And Scott Steiner had taken out the British Bulldog with the Steiner recliner and injuring him in the process. And Jim Neidhart, just comes up in and basically avenges British Bulldog's injury and acknowledges the fact that he's just sick and tired of seeing Scott Steiner cripple all these opponents and just his change of attitude that's been going on the past several months. So it's a simple feud. I mean, it's not too elaborate of any kind, but basically Scott Steiner is obviously going to go over in this match and really establishing him as this credible heel. So yeah, so I would have Scott Steiner go over Jim Neidhart despite his efforts. He's gonna try and do the best he can to basically annihilate Scott Steiner, but laying as much offense as he can. And despite all that, Scott Steiner will end up getting the upper hand and finishing the Anvil with the Steiner recliner. So yeah, so Scott Steiner will go over there. Then we have is a tag team title belt. The Faces of Fear, who were the champions, who had won the championship belts from the Public Enemy at Spring Stampede. They're still the champions going into this May pay per view, so they're defending the belt against Mortis and La Parka. Now you're probably going to ask yourself is why he's teaming with La Parka out of all people. Basically, by looking up at the injury list at this time, Wrath, who was Mortis's tag partner, was sidelined due to an injury that he sustained in February. So, so I'm keeping the idea if a certain wrestler gets injured, they stay injured. No matter how much you change certain scenarios or events, so to speak. But if I insist, there will be like a promo where Mortis and James Vandenberg, who was the manager for that tag team, they'll be scouting out the locker room just to see which particular wrestler would make a good partnership with Mortis, and obviously James Vandenberg, who would make a good alliance with those two. And Laparca actually is chosen. There's a bit of rift between the two. La Parka's been, known as the chairman, and basically, he's been in a lot of these singles matches, so he's really trying to adjust to himself, being as a tag team specialist. And there are times where there's something going on where it just feels like Morris and La Parka might lose the match. Like there's some chances of miscommunication, but Morris and La Parka end up cleaning house and basically winning their respective matches on television. And their win, the rack of wins, allows them a number one contendership opportunity to take on Ming and Barbarian. So yeah, you have the match here, and things are going well, but eventually the Faces of Fear will come out on top, still your tag team champions. Uh, so yeah, so Ming probably locks in the tongue and death grip on Mortis after La Parka tries to go for a chair shot, but accidentally hits Mortis when he was trying to hit Ming. So yeah, so this gives Ming a chance to as the legal man will win with the tongue and death grip, and Barbarian helping trying to distract La Parka in the process. So Faces of Fear will retain the tag team title belts here. Then we have is a cruiserweight battle royal. Winner of that match will go on to face Chris Jericho in the subsequent match. I actually would keep this the same as what we saw. Really great moment. Chris Jericho just coming out, just being the dick that he was, and just being the ring announcer and basically introducing all these cruiserweight wrestlers that they had at the time. Um, and things go on the same way as they did, and Juventud getting eliminated by Ciclope, who in actuality is Dean Malenko in disguise. So creating that big moment. And Chris Jericho loses his shit. He's like shock and awe because Dean Malenko, we haven't seen him in like 2 months now, ever since he came up short against Jericho at Uncensored. So yeah, so this would create a big moment, and Malenko will go on and win the cruiserweight championship belt. So basically the same as what we saw, like I said. So I wouldn't change too much, and yeah. So like I said, Dean Malenko comes back with this, hopefully this huge pop, and Malenko wins that cruiserweight title. Next up we have is Goldberg taking on Perry Saturn. So this was another match that they did at Slamboree. Now I know they were supposed to do a gauntlet match, but for whatever reason they just changed it to a one-on-one match. I did happen to do the gauntlet match at Spring Stampede. As far as my fantasy booking's concerned, and if you watch that Spring Stampede fantasy booking that I did, basically they had the match and everything. Goldberg's cleaning house and basically demolishing a good majority of the flock members. And then, it comes down to him and Perry Saturn. They both have a hard fought bout. And, as soon as Goldberg does the spear and sets up for the jackhammer, but, Lodi would throw in the towel because, when it comes to Raven's rules, this also applies not only to Raven himself, but also involving any members of the flock who, are wrestling in a one on one match or tag match, however you look at it. Um, yeah, so because it's no DQs and no countouts, Lodi does the old school tradition and basically throwing in the towel and Goldberg winning by default. So, given an excuse to kind of continue on with their program. And, Perry Saturn's like, you know what? Goldberg's been this unstoppable force for however many months he's been in since, having his first match in WCW. And, the flock insist on, helping Perry Saturn in some of his matches, but Perry Saturn's like, look, no, 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 no. I could do this. I could beat Goldberg all by himself. I fight my own battles, and I want to take this monster down by myself and really prove that I am uh, a loyal asset to the flock. That I could do something that no one else could ever do, and you're not only putting Goldberg over, but you're also putting over Perry Saturn. So trying to build both guys is my intention of having this sort of one-on-one bout. Um, yeah, so they actually had a pretty solid one-on-one match on pay-per-view before, so hopefully they performed to the best of their ability, and there'll be some dramatic, suspenseful moments where like Perry Saturn uh, somehow kind of figures out Goldberg's strategy. Like he's been watching the tapes of a lot of his matches and trying to be a strategist more so than using brawn power. Um, so like Perry Saturn maybe at some point uh, probably goes for a Death Valley driver on Goldberg. Like maybe he could be the first person to counter the jackhammer and basically does the Death Valley driver. And the announcers put it over as like, oh my god, could Perry Saturn do it? And Goldberg's like laying down unconscious, and Saturn goes for the pinfall. Referee counts 1, 2, and then Goldberg just snaps out near fall, and Saturn's like shock and awe, and announcers just go crazy. Crowd hopefully goes crazy, and Saturn's like, no, no, it's like I had him. That sort of frustration that's kind of building up inside, and Perry Saturn feeling that he should have beaten Goldberg, and it's like, oh my God, is the streak really over? And it turns out that's not the case. So eventually, Saturn tries to fight him off. Goldberg ends up powering out Saturn. Um, he does his signature moves: a spear, jackhammer, 1, 2, 3. Goldberg, wins the match. Just basically, a Superman sort of comeback. Typical Goldberg match, but a pretty long match for Goldberg standard matches. Um, yeah, a lot of his matches tend to like end under like 3 minutes or 5 minutes, but mostly 3 minute matches. Um, Basically over before it began. So yeah, so Goldberg will go over Perry Saturn, despite Saturn's efforts, and make it seem like this guy is capable of defeating an undefeated wrestler like Goldberg, but just giving Goldberg a run for his money, putting the blue to the test. And yeah, so hopefully this could be a really good match. So pretty good pace, hopefully. So Goldberg goes over Perry Saturn. And then we have is the Super Bowl rematch between the Giant and Kevin Nash. So Kevin Nash basically jackknife power bombs the Giant, unintentionally breaking his neck. Because of all those the circumstance surrounding that incident, the Giant is stretchered out of the arena and is unable to compete in a wrestling ring for several months. And Kevin Nash is selling himself as this so-called giant killer, and basically um, demolishing everyone that's in his way. And anytime that Kevin Nash tries to do a jackknife powerbomb or executes it successfully, he normally gets fined. I thought that was pretty cool stuff. Um, yeah, like what they did. So I thought that was a good, a stipulation or some, like a pro, like being prohibited to nail his jackknife powerbomb finisher. Yeah, so after a couple months, the Giant comes back on WCW programming, basically interfering in that Bret Hart Kevin Nash match, and allowing Bret Hart the number 1 contender spot. Um, yeah, so basically Kevin Nash says he wants his rematch. Giant says that um, that he wants he wants another match against him, and Kevin Nash is like, okay, okay, you want to do this, and because J.J. Dillon still has that power bomb banning, so this kind of gives the Giant a bit of a leeway, and Kevin Nash is like, why are you doing this to me, Dillon? I mean, come on, this is not fair. I mean, why would you do this? And Kevin Nash just being a hypocrite that he is, because he's part of the NWO, and the NWO has a tendency to rely on dirty tactics against their opponents, primarily WCW wrestlers. But yeah, so Kevin Nash is just kind of like, why are you doing this to us? And JJ Dillon's like, well, this is what happens when you keep screwing us up with our wrestlers. Trying to get away and trying to use your cheap tactics against us, and now we're just gonna do it right back to you. I mean, something to that effect. Not exactly the line that he would say, but just something to more dramatic effect. But yeah. So regardless, the Giant and Kevin Nash have their rematch. Giant will successfully go over Kevin Nash, and probably wouldn't be a long match. Probably be like under 10 minutes to estimate at that. So the Giant will go over. And then we have is the last two matches here. We have is a dog collar match involving the United States champion Raven defending the belt against Roddy Piper. Now, I didn't mention this in the actual soundbite for my Spring Stampede video. I did, however, provide it down in the description box regarding the overall match cards and mostly stuff that would have happened in and out of the pay per view or during like the build up to a certain pay per view. So yeah, so Raven defeated Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and basically the flock would come out and basically assault Hacksaw Duggan, and then Roddy Piper will come out. We haven't seen him in a couple months, so Roddy Piper runs in to make the save and um, maybe come out with like a sort of weapon, um, and basically doing what he can to scare off the flock members and helping Hacksaw Jim Duggan in the process. And yeah, so that's really how you kick off your feud. And Raven's just been he's just been on a tear, ever since he won that U.S. championship. And he's just continuing to brag that he's the best at what he does, and so he's been kind of like the center of attention. Like when it comes to the flock, their whole purpose is to make sure that Raven, uh, Raven, to keep the belt on, keep the U.S. title belt on Raven, and making sure that things go his way. Being uh, the self-centered egotist that he is, and that he should be the guy that should be on top, that he should be the one going after the world championship belt, and that he should get where he gets everything that he wants, and um, that he should be the top guy of the company. Um, and so basically he's always been hearing all about the NWO, and how they're gonna take over and all this sort of stuff. And Raven started asking questions like, "What about me? What about Raven?" Yeah, so basically Roddy Piper comes out and basically just basically he's been looking over WCW programming. He's been watching it at home, and he hasn't been on TV for a while, so it's like Piper's just uh, having to see Raven glued all to the screen, and how sickening that every time he comes out there and sees him cripple his opponents the way he does, and the way that he mistreats the flock members um, like they're his puppets, if you want to put it that. And Piper is just sick to his stomach, just seeing just how the way he treats his subordinates, his teammates. And Piper's like, you know what? I'm, you know, I'm, I want this opportunity. I want to take this opportunity as a matter of fact. And he's coming out to the ring, and basically he's holding this dog collar chain. He's just whipping it around like a whiplash or something. And basically, he talks about how that that Raven should respect his predecessors, and the way that he saw Hacksaw Jim Duggan getting brutally beaten the way he did, and just kind of reminding him of some of the earlier matches that Piper had, many years ago, and looking at that dog collar, and basically talking about the dog collar match he had with Greg Valentine. Now you're probably gonna ask yourself, is like, what does this have anything to do with the build up? So so basically, given the fact that ever since Raven came to WCW, he would always contest his matches under Raven's rules, that he could wrestle wherever he want, whenever he want, and Raven's done things his way, But now this time, however, Roddy Piper, you want to fight against Raven's rules. You say that you make your own rules in your matches. Well, guess what? Because I'm the interim commissioner of WCW, so therefore I can make the matches I want to. So you want to do things under Raven's rules? Well, this time, however, you're gonna do things under my rules, Piper's rules. Cause come Slamboree, I'm gonna make sure that you will endure the big amount of pain that you will suffer, and this is gonna change your entire life. Um, and so I've been in dog collar matches before. I've fought I fought a U.S. champion. I fought a wrestler that held that same Covenant belt that you're carrying around your shoulders, and now this is about time that um, it's about time that I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna kick your ass, come Slamboree. And I know it sounds very terrible, but yeah. So they actually have the dog collar match, and basically Raven will go over Roddy Piper. A pretty bloody match. I know WCW is actually pretty cautious at the time when it has blood, which was very rare, to see in WCW. But I want to make this match kind of stand out. Hopefully, it wouldn't hurt to at least see a bit of a blade job between both Raven and Piper. Um, by this point, WWF was already gone full on Attitude Era, so they were already doing a lot of hardcore wrestling and all this sort of stuff. But I think this would be kind of like the talk of the town, and these guys can cut really good promos. I think they could really, um, they're that they could really help sell the feud, and the match will hopefully be just as good as the build up to that feud, and this would go on as long as it will, as long as it, as far as being like a double header main event's concerned. But Raven will retain the U.S. title belt against Roddy Piper and really kind of cementing Raven. Um, yeah, so there you have it. That, and then we have is the main event. So the World Heavyweight Championship, we have Sting defending the belt against Bret Hart. If you remember back at Starrcade '97, Sting versus Hogan, Bret Hart, interfered in the match. Uh, books himself to be the referee, and there's a lot of controversy that was going on as far as people remember. Hogan doing the leg drop, and Nick Patrick, who was the referee at the time, was believed to have made a fast count, but it wasn't really a fast count. And Bret Hart restarts the match. Sting ends up taking advantage and uses the Scorpion Deathlock and allowing Hogan to submit to make Sting the World Heavyweight Champion. And then Sting, he's been holding that belt for almost 4 or 5 months by this point, almost 5 months specifically. And Sting's been talking about how he's gone through, how he's overcame so many odds. He's fighting all the top tier NWO wrestlers, and he's beaten Hogan, he's beaten Scott Hall, he's beaten Kevin Nash, he's beaten Randy Savage, who had already been kicked out. But as far as him being a former member of the NWO is concerned, um, and now Sting is kind of he's kind of thinking about whether or not that he is truly the world champion, and that he's not that type of wrestler that would resort to dirty tactics, and um he is the savior. They've always announcers have always mentioned that he's always been the savior of the company, that he would do whatever he can to protect his home turf, um that he grew up wrestling, that made a name for himself here in this particular sport, in WCW. And because of Bret Hart's involvement in that Starrcade '97 match, it's like, does Sting really think that he should be the World Heavyweight Champion? That is he really deserving of the belt? He's just been kind of there's just been a lot of emotions that he's kind of going through, and Bret Hart's idolized Sting, and that he always wanted to wrestle against him for many years, and finally he could have this opportunity to step foot in the ring, squaring off against his idol, and and basically, since coming to WCW, Bret Hart's also been kind of on a winning streak, and this kind of comes. Uh, they finally cross paths once again. So Bret Hart's staying. They have the match, and hopefully a really this should be a show stealer match, especially since it's the main event. And I know they did Sting and Bret Hart later on in the year, but by the time they did it at Halloween Havoc '98, Sting and Bret Hart just lost so much momentum compared to their uh, compared to what happened, at the tail end of 1997, because Sting had been in the rafters. He's been kind of like this number one wrestler that's willing to, that he could be the it guy to finally take down the NWO. And then 1998 comes in, and then he they vacated the belt, and then Sting wins the belt, but he lost the belt again, and then he joins the Wolf Pack, and with Kevin Nash as the leader, and Sting has been kind of second fiddle because of the whole Nash versus Hogan and the Wolf Pack Hollywood feud that had dominated the summer and fall of '98. And then you look at Bret Hart's side of it, and Bret Hart had turned heel and supposedly sided with the NWO, but not actually joined the stable, which was very confusing as a viewer. And Bret Hart was wearing Hulk Hogan shirts and sucking up to Hogan, despite the fact that he screwed over Hogan at Starrcade '97 over the title belt. So that didn't make any sense why he would put the belt back on Hogan. Um, just completely negating all the crap that he did at that pay per view in December, and it just didn't make any sense. And Bret Hart kept turning face and heel, and got to the point where those guys just it didn't really mean as much, and those two wrestlers were just kind of like upper mid carders. So, but nonetheless, in this particular revisionist booking, so to speak, Sting and Bret Hart going into the Slamboree match will hopefully still have maintained that popularity and momentum that they had from Starrcade, and this should really be given a plenty of time. I can't really see these two guys have a disappointing match, and Sting will retain the world title against Bret Hart. There'll be a lot of times where Sting tries to go for a Scorpion Deathlock, but Bret Hart somehow finds a way to fight out of it. And Bret Hart also goes for a sharpshooter as well, and even Sting fights out of it as well. Sting will eventually win with the Scorpion Death Drop, basically going for that cover. So Sting wins and retains the World Heavyweight Championship. So Sting and Bret Hart, they shake hands. They both had a hard fought bout, and then the flock, ends up attacking Sting and Bret Hart, jumping them from behind. Lex Luger comes out, since Sting's buddy Lex Luger comes out and basically tries to fend off the flock members, and um, maybe you could have Goldberg come out there, considering the fact he feuded with Saturn earlier on in the earlier on in the pay per view, and yeah, I think that's how you would end the show there. So everyone's all the baby faces are standing tall. The flock benders get what they deserve, and Sting's kind of looking onwards to Raven, and really kind of foreshadowing a potential program for them. So yeah, so that's pretty much how I would end the show, and as well as the match, but more importantly, the show itself. So yeah, that's it for my Slamboree 1998 fantasy card. Let me know what you guys think. Were there some things that you liked? Were there some ideas that you didn't like? Or what would you have done differently? So feel free to let me know down in the comment section below. Stay tuned as I book the annual June pay-per-view, the Great American Bash. So stick around for that. And till next time, this is the Gold Standard 00924 signing out.